Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The deadline for states to submit challenges, let's say the recommended deadline for states to submit challenges for broadband locations is today, Friday the 13th. Now, whether or not states will be able to do that and get those taken into account later, we don't know, but so far there's a report now that 350,000 locations have been challenged. Be right back, we'll talk about that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So I saw this story on Fierce Telecom that the FCC broadband map challenge is near 350,000 as the deadline looms. Now they have reached out to some states and gotten some numbers, but they haven't talked to all of them, so we really don't know what the real number is, but this is a big number right here that we see right here, on 350,000. So I'm going to read through this. States have already submitted more than 300,000. We see it's close to 350 at this point. Location challenges since the FCC opened the door for them to request corrections to its new and improved broadband map, but as a deadline for availability challenges looms, that deadline's today, some states have said that they've encountered issues with the submission process. So today was the date that the FCC and the NTIA came out and said, hey, if you want to get your challenges taken into account to be reflected in the next broadband map, which is going to be the production broadband map, which is going to determine what the allocation is for every state that they're going to get from BEAD, then they were to try to get that in today. Now, there have been some suggestions that there might be a little wiggle room in there. We don't know how long, how much, but if states are trying to get those challenges in and still trying to get those challenges in, that data may still make it into the next map, but there is going to be a cutoff at some point because, number one, ISPs have to overlay their availability data on top of the location data, and they're in the process of doing that right now. They've got the fabric, they got access to the fabric, I think January 3rd. So they're now going through the process, and they have till March 1st to do that, to get all of their availability data onto the fabric, and then that's going to be what is used to make the map. In addition, consumers can make challenges, and if the challenges are related to a service not being correct as far as it's not available there, the type of service is not there. They say it's fiber, but it's really DSL, or they say they can get a gig, but the highest package they can get is 25. Then those kinds of challenges consumers can make, and those have to be responded to by the ISP within 60 days, within 60 days. And then if the ISP doesn't respond, the FCC will rule on that in some fashion. So that puts us out 60 days or so with those consumer challenges. So we'll have to see, but maybe that's the time frame where the FCC is going to be looking at some of this data. So we don't know if it'll be 30 days, 60 days, or something in between, but there is going to be a deadline. The FCC told Fierce that while individual challenges are visible on its broadband map interface, it's not reporting aggregate figures about the challenges it has received. So in other words, if a consumer challenges something, if somebody goes into the map interface, anybody I guess goes to the map interface and challenges something, that challenge shows up on there. But all of the many, many, many bulk challenges that have been made, I'm assuming that certainly would be fabric. Well, fabric challenges should be taken into account. So any challenges that were made prior to this last fabric, the current one that ISP started working on January 3rd, any challenges that made it into that fabric will be reflected on the map as far as serviceable locations. But other kinds of bulk challenges, like bulk map challenges, it sounds like, if you didn't go into the map interface, but you issued a bulk challenge where you had maybe a whole neighborhood that was missing, that's not going to be reflected on the map, it sounds like. So Fierce reached out to more than 40 states to ask whether they had planned to submit challenges to the map since the contest window opened last year. Using their responses and public reports about challenges, Fierce determined that more than 344,000 challenges have been filed between 9 states, but given there are dozens of other states unaccounted for, the real number could actually be far higher. And that's true, it could be higher. Although some states have said, we just can't get the challenges in. They've said it because they don't have time. They've also said it, as we'll see here, because of some issues with questions about who's doing their mapping that they would be using to challenge that information. Can they submit that data to CostQuest because of licensing kinds of issues? So there's different reasons why some states are not even trying. They're recommending, they're trying to promote for their constituency, the people that live in their state, to actually go in, consumers to go in and actually challenge that on the map directly. To set the stage, the FCC's map is comprised of two layers of data: location information supplied by CostQuest and service availability metrics submitted by operators. So CostQuest won the contract with the FCC to create the Broadband Fabric. That is supposed to be the definitive list of where every broadband serviceable location and structure is in the United States and the territories, I believe. I'm sure they did the territories as well because they're getting part of that money. When I say definitive, we know there were errors in this first. So they were making their first passing, doing that as best as they can. And then there were some bulk challenges to that fabric data that should have been incorporated into this current fabric that ISPs are now working with. So that's the fabric data. And then on top of that, as it mentions, service providers, where they said they service, the addresses that they service. And that could be more than one at a location that are all putting that data onto the map. And when you go to the broadband map today, the draft version of it, you click on your address and you'll see one or more ISPs that have submitted that data. And you can check to see if your home is in the right place, if it's actually there. You can check to see if the service that you're supposed to be getting is there. And that's how you can double check what you're supposed to get and then also challenge that if there's something that's not right there. So consumers can do that. Let's see, states can seek to correct both, meaning locations or availability, highlighting missing or misplaced locations or contesting overstated availability claims. These challenge processes run simultaneously on a staggered rolling basis. That's what makes this a little difficult, is there's several challenges going on at once. An initial version of the location fabric was unveiled in September 2022, opening the door for challenges to begin. The FCC released an updated version of the fabric in December. That would have been late December, I think, because I don't think ISPs got that until, I think it was announced in late December, and I think they got it January 3rd. A full version of the map, which included availability data, was released in November. That was November 18th. Kicking off the availability of the challenge process. That was the challenge process for availability, not locations, which would have been sooner. So location challenges started at mid-September, like September 15th. ISPs, municipalities, and others could challenge the location data on the fabric. Those challenges, as far as these challenges on the map, related to the map, are supposed to be submitted by January 13th, 2023 to be incorporated into the second full version of the map, which will be used by the government to calculate state allocations from the $42.5 billion BEAD program. It goes without saying that between the two layers, the FCC is sorting through a lot of challenges. These included location challenges covering 31,798 addresses in New York, more than 13,000 in Colorado, at least 16,000 in Pennsylvania, 33,000 in South Carolina, 138,000 in West Virginia, which the Associated Press reported was also planning 40,000 more. Wow, 37,000 in Georgia, 60,000 in Louisiana, 7,000 in Wisconsin, 8,583 in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Broadband Institute indicated it also plans to submit an estimated 1,300 to 2,000 availability challenges by the January 13 deadline. So that these challenges in Massachusetts are probably location challenges, and these additional numbers would be availability. I'm assuming most of these other numbers that they're listing here, like the 138,000 in West Virginia, these are going to be location challenges. And it's very possible that these challenges, if they haven't been submitted, if they weren't submitted before the new fabric came out or before the new fabric was finalized, they might be in the new fabric, because these challenges didn't just have to be done by the state of West Virginia. They could have been done by the broadband providers that were there. So broadband providers servicing West Virginia might have said, wait a minute, you're missing a whole bunch of areas here, or you've got these addresses wrong. So they would have already challenged that, but it didn't show up until it didn't show up in the map, right? It's not in the map. And it would only show up in the broadband fabric that right now is being looked at if they got it in time. So a representative for Vermont's Community Broadband Board told Fierce it was planning to submit 20 to 25 bulk challenges, but could not say how many locations were included in those. A representative from Delaware said it has no significant challenge to report at this time. Minnesota's Office of Broadband Development stated it didn't have specific numbers to share because we've encouraged local government units, as well as statewide residents, providers, organizations, and partners to review the maps for accessibility, accuracy, and fabric accuracy. They're leaning on everybody. The state's not doing it, so they're going to the providers and saying, hey, you make sure you check it on your own. Consumers, you check it. Local communities, you check it. So they're having everybody else kind of check it. Virginia officials told Fierce the agency will challenge hundreds of thousands of locations that we believe are incorrectly reported as served in the FCC's map. However, it was unclear whether any of those challenges had already been filed. Now again, if they're looking at the map, it's very possible that these hundreds of thousands is much, much smaller because the service providers in that area, or maybe even communities, local communities or other stakeholders, may have already challenged that information, and maybe those challenges made it into, well, I take that back, they wouldn't have made it into the map. But if they challenged that after the map was like, let's say after November, then that would not be on the map. So there was a deadline for that. So it's very possible that those huge numbers of locations, even though they're not showing up on the map, are on the new fabric. And we'll see something here about the new fabric that's confusing people as well. Meanwhile, the Kentucky Office of Broadband Development told Fierce her office is planning to challenge over 12,000 locations on the broadband map. Again, don't know if those locations are actually correct on the new fabric or not. They may be, even though they're not showing up that way on the map. Senators from Nevada recently wrote a letter to the FCC that identified more than 20,000 locations on the map where coverage was misstated. So again, if they're looking at the map, the current fabric that's being worked on right now might have those locations, a good percentage of them, assuming that there's an internet service provider in that area that's providing service that would have updated it or made that challenge. Talks about hurdles here. The rep from Vermont, for instance, said the state's broadband team suffered a setback in compiling its challenges after the FCC released the second version of its location to fabric last month. The data is suddenly different, yes, as of December 20th, than what they would have been working with all along, causing them to have to rework all the challenges at the last minute. So again, they were looking at the broadband map and they weren't aware of any challenges that were made on the previous fabric. When the new fabric came out, it would all be different. That's what I've been saying, is that a lot of these locations, maybe not nearly as many as they thought there were. I'm assuming that's what they're seeing, is like, wait a minute, now we have these locations on the fabric. So it says here, we're having big problems with the bulk challenge we're trying to file before the deadline. In other words, I think they need to start from scratch. They need to look at the new broadband fabric, not at the map. And as far as location data, try to figure out where the locations are wrong based on the fabric and not based on the broadband map. Elsewhere, states which have contracted third-party vendors to create their own broadband maps are working through how to share data from their maps with the FCC. Issues here revolve around contractual restrictions against data sharing and concerns about whether proprietary data shared by a state's third-party vendor might be used by the FCC's vendor CostQuest for its own commercial purposes. So here's where we have this issue between Lightbox and CostQuest. Lightbox has been doing a lot of the state maps, and CostQuest did the national map. Lightbox challenged CostQuest's winning of that contract, which caused a fairly long delay in getting the broadband fabric made. That challenge was eventually denied. But now there's a question as to why, who owns this data? I would think taxpayers own this data, right? If you're in the state, you paid taxes to get this data prepared. If you live in the United States, you pay taxes to get this broadband fabric created, and the FCC contracted that, or the state contracted that. But so I would think this data should be available to anybody, and it should be able to be shared between Lightbox and CostQuest and vice versa, because they should not own that. They were contracted to create this fabric, but that doesn't mean they should be able to own it. Maybe they can own the technology that creates that fabric, but they should not own the data that's on it. That makes no sense. But some states looking at the licensing are saying, well, wait a minute, according to what Lightbox licensing looks like, we can't share this with CostQuest because we're not supposed to share that, because CostQuest could then take that data and use it to improve their fabric. Well, yeah, that's why you contracted with Lightbox, is so that you could use that data to improve the CostQuest fabric. So again, I don't know why states are not fighting this. Some are just giving up and throwing their hands up and saying, we can't challenge it. We need to get our consumers to do it. See here, broadband director for the Wyoming Business Council told Fierce the state of Wyoming retained Lightbox to conduct its mapping. Lightbox is currently in discussions with the FCC about how to share its data with FCC CostQuest and guide the data's usage. If the state, in my opinion, contracted to provide that data, then Lightbox should have no say in that. And if the FCC contracted for CostQuest to provide its data, CostQuest should have no say in what happens to the actual data. Now, again, the fabric itself and the technology and whatever, how they did that, that could all be proprietary. But the data itself, that's what we paid for, in my opinion. So anyway, today's the day, and whether it gets extended remains to be seen. I wouldn't be surprised, I was talking about the other day, I wouldn't be surprised if there's wiggle room on that deadline, because there's always wiggle room on deadlines. You see that all the time. If you get invited to something like a webinar or something like that, they'll or something where there's a deadline to sign up, they'll say, you'll get an email that day, the deadline, say, hey, we've extended a week or 2 weeks. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if behind the scenes, the NTIA and the FCC are saying, well, we told them January 13th, but we think we're not going to really need it until February 15th or something like that, because they're going to be, there's a lot going on in the background, and they're going to be trying to gather as much data as they can. And they certainly want to get these maps, this next map, as accurate as possible, because this is what determines how much each state is going to get from BEAD. As I've said, though, I think that the really large bulk challenges of location data has been probably mostly taken care of, because states and really service providers had the ability to do that starting September 15th. So they've had 4 or so months to do that. It would be in the service provider's best interest to make sure that every location they serve was actually in the new fabric, so that they can then add their availability data. They could add the fact that they serve that area. Now, hopefully, there's not a lot of funny business going on where service providers are claiming that they can do 25.3 and they really can't. And I think we've seen some of that. I've heard reports of that. But for the most part, I mean, if these are cable operators, fiber operators, those are generally going to be well over the broadband threshold of 25/3, the current broadband threshold. So this is going to be just those areas probably where there's maybe DSL, maybe some fixed wireless that's not 5G, maybe some older technology, those kinds of things, where there may be, satellite doesn't count really for BEAD, so that doesn't matter. But if it's licensed fixed wireless and DSL, those are some areas where maybe those numbers could be overstated in such a way where it could impact the allocations. But for most broadband operators, they're going to have a package that's going to be well over 25/3, and if that's the advertised speed, and hopefully they're delivering something over 25/3 on that package as well, then that would not impact allocations. So I'm hoping that it's mostly tens of thousands of locations that have been fixed on the fabric that we're looking at now, and that if not, this is the fabric that's being used to create the next map. So I guess the next step on that, or the next opportunity, would be challenging the broadband map and the locations that are on there. But again, the locations that are on there do not reflect, the current broadband map do not reflect the current broadband fabric. Does that make sense? So the current broadband map that was rolled out on November 18th does not reflect broadband fabric challenges that were made, because those, at least not probably the majority of them, unless they were able to get some early ones in there, because the new broadband fabric is really what the next map's going to be created on. A little bit confusing. That's why it's so hard for people that got to do these challenges, because they've got 2 different things that they're trying to challenge, and they're not in sync. You've got broadband fabric and challenges for that. You've got broadband availability from the map, and the 2 are not in sync. They won't get in sync until we see the next broadband map. And that's when the next broadband map will reflect the current broadband fabric and the current availability data provided by ISPs. I expect that out in maybe mid-May. We'll see. Thanks for joining me. If this was interesting or helpful, if you'd give me a like on the video, I'd appreciate it. I always like that. And if you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button. Click the bell to be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next week for Broadband Deployment News. Take care.